What do you do if you're hacked? Who do you call? How do you respond to customers? Who do you involve? To go into that topic in more depth, we're now going to welcome up two CEOs, Chris Rose from Ariento, Rusty Sailors from Secure Smart Office, and to interview them from the Wall Street Journal, Kim Nash.
Hello, everyone. I thought that we would really try to break this down. You know you've been hacked, so presumably you all have incident response plans. But what are, Rusty, some of the things that companies should do in the first moments, hours after discovering something like this?
Well, in that last discussion, I thought it was really, really poignant because I'm listening to all the points he's making. I was like, that's what I was going to say. Oh, I was going to say that too. That's a really good point. I should have said that. You know, all the preparation about ahead of time is everything, right? Because you don't want to try to do this while you're under fire. That's the very worst time to do this. So actually going through exercises and getting your plan together. You know, I've been saying this here in San Diego for 7 years now. And follow up after all the different tabletop exercises and all the different events and stuff like that. So few people actually put that plan together ahead of time, right? So it's interesting that this particular topic is like what happens after you get hacked. You know, we like people to be protected ahead of time before they get hacked. I don't know how many calls we actually received last year to serve as a computer incident response team to people here in the San Diego region when they got hacked. We're like, why don't you call us first, you know, to help protect you? Because we really do focus on small and medium-sized businesses. Now, I thought it was interesting about the conversation about the FBI because I think it's really, really a good idea to use the San Diego Law Enforcement Coordination Center. And if you talk with Matt Miller and other people from the Coordination Center and your InfraGard chapter here, there's a very strong relationship between the InfraGard chapter and the Fusion Center, and that same relationship is beginning to spread across the nation. I now have the opportunity to serve on the national board for InfraGard, and it's pretty cool to see these fusion centers now starting these relationships with InfraGard in all these major cities. So that's a really good thing to do right there, is to develop a relationship.
You want to have a plan, you want to have relationships in place, but really in a practical sense, Chris, maybe you chime in about what are the calculations you're making once you discover something is seriously wrong with your systems or your data has been compromised? So in the first day when you're dealing with this.
Sure. I mean, I completely agree with Rusty. Prepared is better if you have a response and you've already thought through these things. It's definitely better. But I think really there's two calls you're making right away. One is to your attorney, and hopefully you have an incident response plan that you already know who you're calling. Maybe it's a specific data breach attorney, maybe it's just your general counsel. But ultimately they're going to be guiding this whole process if you do. And the second call, I think, is to probably an investigator, so a digital forensics firm. If you have a cyber liability policy, call them because they typically will have preferred vendors that they can point you to. But the attorney is the one that should be kind of managing this throughout the process as you kind of figure out what's going on.
Why should the attorney manage, not the IT specialist?
Sure, so I mean, the biggest reason is the potential of if you bring in a firm to do kind of digital forensics and investigate what's going on, and it does end up being a data breach, and you do this communication to all your customers or partners or whatever it might be, if somebody sues you down the road, if your attorney hired them, you're free from subpoena power, right? It's that attorney-client privilege. If you hire them as your company and your IT is running this point of contact, they can be subpoenaed and what they discover can be testified against. So I think those are the two calls, attorney and an investigative firm. And then you said the first day, I echo the last topic where a lot of it is ownership. You want to focus on, okay, who owns communication? And they're the only person that's going to own communication. And these firms can help you with this. Who owns kind of remediation? Are we going to unplug? Are we going to unplug just this machine where we found this at? But clear ownership of the decisions, I think, is very important because it is a time of chaos.
Significantly agree with the attorney first. because of the attorney-client privilege. Also, that they're going to have a strong understanding of what is under legal restrictions within your company. And before you expose that to anyone, when you bring in a response team, they're going to have a non-disclosure. Well, that non-disclosure applies to everything that the legal counsel is actually covering. And then the other people that we really want you to consider reaching out to as quickly as possible is law enforcement. And that's the reason I was going down that path a little bit earlier, is because even smaller companies develop a relationship with the FBI and develop that relationship ahead of time, and the FBI is willing to do that. They have outreach programs consistently running seminars and boot camps and stuff like that for small businesses, specifically for you, small businesses, so that you have somebody to turn to. But there are also other places here in San Diego County, as mentioned a little bit earlier. They have CAPTCHA through the city of San Diego and other cyber response capabilities that are emerging, but doing it very, very quickly, because the cleanup afterwards that criminals do is they use those bank accounts and they clear those things out. The FBI can respond very, very quickly if you give them the opportunity to do so.
What goes through, what's involved in the calculation of whether to involve law enforcement? Is something too small to involve law enforcement?
Yeah, for us, very, very quickly, and again, for small businesses, don't overcomplicate this thing. You know, for me, the very first thing we discuss with the company is, what's your hardware inventory? And you go, well, yeah, that makes sense. No, we run into tons of companies that don't understand their hardware inventory, their software inventory, their data inventory, their credentials inventory, and finally, their cyber hygiene inventory. If you just stop about those particular things, then when you get breached, you're like, well, what data was touched? Mm-hmm. And when you did that data inventory, you determined it was really valuable and it deserved to be significantly secured. Mm-hmm. But then if something happens to it, you actually know, since you did that data inventory, what's important, what's valuable, and what's not.
Mm-hmm. Is that how you do the calculation, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the prepared stuff. I think that law enforcement, my personal experience, our personal experience, can be a bit of a mixed bag. I think it's getting better, but the truth is that this has kind of come overnight or close to overnight, and there's not, one of the biggest issues that is being talked about at this conference is the cybersecurity talent bench strength, right? And I mentioned digital forensics investigators. That is a very strong skill set that is in high demand, and a lot of the local law enforcement agencies don't have that skill set. The FBI has it, but the FBI is also working on the Sonys of the world. So I think in our personal experience, yes, call law enforcement. I think it's been a mixed bag as far as how they're going to be able to help you. If you're caught up, if you're truly really small and you're caught up in something that's maybe there's a lot of other small businesses caught up in, we've seen a lot of interest in that. But it just, this goes back to the preparedness and kind of really being prepared, because I wouldn't count on that like a physical break into your office where you can just call the local law enforcement, they're going to investigate it. Depending on where you are, the resources might not be what you think they should be, and it's really because everybody's struggling with this.
Do you have to consider whether you want to do a future investigation or make a claim on your insurance, and how to preserve evidence or document what you did in response?
We asked that question right up front when we engaged as a response team. Right off the bat, we were asking these people, when a hack happens to them, we asked them very specific questions, and I'll just keep it general right here because I don't want to get into the legalities of this, but do you want to pursue this from a legal perspective, yes or no? And if they say no, then we signed this thing. You said, no, I don't want to pursue this from a legal perspective. And so when we do that investigation, we're even going to, because they want to get back in place up to speed as quickly as possible, because small businesses go out of business because they're not generating revenue while they're down, while they've been hacked. So some of these companies will make the decision, I want to get back into business as fast as possible. I don't care about taking anybody to court. What we do then is streamline the process. We don't do all the journaling that you would do during the investigative process that you would do if it was going to be legally prosecuted. On the flip side, if it is going to be legally prosecuted, then you have to make sure that every step along the way that you're collecting evidence, the chain of custody, everything else that you need to do. The last point on that is, if they say no, I don't want to prosecute, and you wind up finding something that by legal mandates must be disclosed to legalities.
Like what? What would that be?
Child porn or anything like that, then you don't have any choice. You have to inform the authorities. And you let the client know that if that happens, there's no choice on your part.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that's why it's really important to get the attorney involved early on and have them manage this, because these things tend to take on a life of their own, these investigations. And you don't really know where they're going to go. You don't really know how long they've been in your system. You don't really know if there's multiple actors in your system. And I think each step of the way, so we come in with digital forensics investigators, and we are more the remediation. We'll rebuild kind of an entire network in parallel. We'll re-image all the machines. We'll kind of get you back and manage you going forward so this doesn't happen again. So we come into a lot of these with the forensics folks, and my experience is there's multiple check-ins along the way, and the story and the investigation is constantly changing, and it depends on how prepared you were and how much evidence there is to investigate, and the attorney is really the person to interpret that information, interpret the laws, say, hey, keep going with this investigation. Obviously, there's a financial component to it, but they really do kind of take on a life of their own. And there's certain times where I've seen attorneys make the call where it's just like, hey, let's stop. That's enough. We've kind of dove in as far as we think we can, and there's not going to be enough evidence to be able to say for sure anyways. And if we keep going, we might open ourselves up to other things. So I think the attorney is really important.
Early on, I think one of the most important things is to develop a timeline. And the reason I say this is because, and then having the right people, access to the right people that can help you develop the timeline of when these things happen. And the reason that's really important is somebody says, well, it happened on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Well, think about how many millions of transactions are happening. So when you deploy these forensics tools, you're looking at all this messaging that happened on specific devices across the network, and you're gathering all this information to try to find out who did what to whom on the network and on what devices. Well, it was really Monday at 12 o'clock. So you're looking at this stuff on Tuesday at 1 o'clock and looking through millions of transactions only to find out it was actually the previous day. So there's this whole really important aspect of, as a company, be prepared to provide a timeline to the investigators so that they actually know where to look. Because it's very, very valuable to actually find the right time frame to deploy your tools within that. If they get deployed in the wrong place, then you kind of back up a little bit, and now all of a sudden you start finding evidences in other areas.
So it's a mystery to solve, but is it even possible, if you've been compromised and some employee unwittingly wired money to a hacker bank account, is it possible to get that money back?
I will respond, and you're welcome to, Chris, because I just finished talking.
No, I mean, it's an FBI. I think our experience is really that's an FBI thing, and it depends. I think it's hard a lot of the time. One of the common ones that was going around a few years ago was the real estate scam, right? People wiring it to the wrong account, and a lot of times that money was gone. But I think that's really, when you're talking about that, you're really at the FBI and law enforcement level if it's going to be possible.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons to respond as quickly as possible. And again, going through your attorney, engage the FBI as quickly as possible if there has been a financial transaction like that. Two reasons. One is that the FBI really can respond and get your money back in many, many instances. And we've talked with the FBI almost all the way to the top about these particular responses that they do, and they're very effective at it. On the other hand, if you don't, those accounts get closed out and that money's gone. There's nothing you can really do about it.
What about if you have business insurance or even specifically cyber insurance? What do you have to take into account in terms of filing a claim, and what can you expect? What kind of support can you expect back?
With the cyber stuff, so cyber liability, typically what we see most of the time with the small and mid-sized organizations is you guys are doing the endorsements to your professional liability policy as opposed to a standalone policy. We are seeing more standalone policies, but if you look at the cyber market, the endorsements are by far kind of the predominance. Every insurance company is different. What I would encourage you to do is really know the policy exclusions to your policy ahead of time. Read it, know it, because I started in the insurance world, the auto insurance world, and it's all about pricing risk. And there's a lot of variables in auto insurance to be able to price risk really well. There's not a lot of variable. The cyber stuff is still new, and they're still figuring out how to price this, and a lot of times the only way they can price these risks is by putting caps on their obligation and their liability, or by doing policy exclusions where that certain events are excluded from kind of either first party or third party coverage. So I don't know that I have an answer. Different insurance companies are different, but I think know ahead of time what type of policy you have and what the exclusions are, because we've seen some bad experiences where. What's
an example of a bad experience?
So I mean, a simple example, which is not, so the acts of God is in every insurance policy, right? But maybe it was related to a physical break-in, and it was a physical theft of a device that wasn't encrypted, which technically, by states falls under the data breach laws because unauthorized access to PII, but because it was a physical claim and physical security, a cyber policy might exclude something like that, even though you're going through the data breach process.
When he was talking about doing the remediation, we do the same thing. And what we're finding now is that companies, two things. One is that when companies are going after contracts, those clients, to our clients, are saying, what are all the security controls that you put in place? This is also the same kind of thing with cybersecurity insurance or cyber insurance. We're finding now that a lot of our larger clients are coming to us and saying, would you review these policies? And in the back of the policy, it has an addendum that says, what are you doing for these particular security controls in your company?
The insurer is asking.
Yeah. Much more so than they used to. They used to give you a little form that has like 4 little questions on it. Do you have a firewall? Do you have antivirus or whatever? Today, they're getting more and more sophisticated, and we're seeing these forms that the remediation side of it becomes very, very important, because if you just stop about and think about it from a principal perspective, when do you want to get your cyber insurance? When you have high risk or lower risk? Go put your remediation in place, put all your security controls in place, drive that risk down, and then transition that residual risk to cyber insurance. And then you can actually answer all those questions that are in that questionnaire with very positive answers.
That's a great point. So the other thing I would say is your IT should not fill out the cyber liability application, because they want to answer, they might answer, we talked about the whole plan and the continuous, security programs are a continuous thing. Yeah. Oh, well, we're going to do that, so I'm just going to go ahead and put yes right now, because we plan on implementing that. And then something happens, and they deny your claim because you actually didn't fill out, the policy questions right. So I think that is, we've seen that. That's a bad day.
Right. Okay. What about the regulatory aspects of getting hacked? How do you sort through the notifications you have to make and figure out which state or larger regulations that you have to fulfill?
That's a great question, and people who are going to be at this conference to help you answer those kind of questions are people like Justine Phillips. I know specific clients that we've interacted with. We've actually brought in Justine to answer those questions because she knows as everything continues to change in cyber, we try to keep up with that. As everything changes in legal, she tries to keep up with that kind of stuff. And so she'll let you know, you're this size company, you have this many transactions, you do this much business, you have to do this. And not everybody's going to know that. So some of the people you want to contact are your legal representatives for that. Also, there's the Small Business Association is a great resource for small companies, because I'm pretty passionate about protecting small companies. Use those kind of resources and the free legal advice that they have available there.
Okay.
I mean, so the data breach stuff, so it's just reporting requirements, right? So you should know if you're in a compliance industry. Defense contractors have a different reporting requirement. You're reporting to DibNet. Healthcare, you're talking about the Department of Health in California. You're also talking about OCR nationally. But I think typically the data breach stuff is state regulated right now. Hopefully a federal statute comes out at some point to supersede. Just to walk through a quick example, so California and this was already kind of mostly covered, but just if something happens, one, it's not necessarily a breach, right? A breach is defined in California as unauthorized access to personally identifiable information. Know the definition of PII in your state or the states that you do business in. That definition is growing. It's becoming something where more and more stuff is considered PII. So was there unauthorized access? a stolen, unencrypted laptop is unauthorized access because you have to assume that they could access it, all the way up to kind of the advanced persistent threats, where, you know, and if you can't necessarily prove, this is a question for an attorney, you can't necessarily prove that they didn't access it, you know, do you make the assumption that they did or not, and where is your data, you know, getting back to the last speaker. So if there was unauthorized access to PII in the state of California, you have to notify, and there's a template, the Senate bill template, where you have to kind of follow that and let them know what was potentially accessed, what you're doing about it, what you've brought in. If it's more than 500 records, you have to report to the California State Attorney General, and you have to send them your communication, and that gets posted. You can Google right now, California Attorney General data breach, and you can go look through all the breach notifications that have been out there. At that point, you can decide whether to do credit monitoring or not. In the state of California, you actually don't have to, is my understanding, but if you do, you have to do it for a year. But now you're getting into kind of remediation mode. So are you bringing in somebody to investigate? Are you know, how are you remediating this going forward? You're going to want to put that in the communication. And there are firms now out there, because this is so common, that all they do is the public relations and the communication stuff. Mm-hmm. They'll set up the 1-800 number, take the calls so that you limit your business interruption, explain to people how to sign up for their credit monitoring. So there's different ways to go about it, but it's a state-regulated thing, and you should know the laws of your state.
I foot stomp that thing about the state-regulated, because the definition of a breach in different states is very, very different.
Every state has a different
exactly,
definition.
and you're talking about a federal definition for that, which would be great. And some people say, well, I didn't get breached. Well, you know, in some states, it's like you're talking about, somebody just had access to it. In other states, somebody had to actually take something out. If they accessed it, but they didn't take something out, it's not a breach. And so you don't know that. You run your business selling tile or whatever it is you do. And so that's why I recommend, you know, find somebody who can give you the right kind of insight and legal counsel. I just read an article that was sent by Sam the other day that here's the difference between GDPR and the California privacy laws. So here's something that you should know about as a small business, the differences between those and which would you actually have to respond to.
You know, since we're in California, is there anything in the CCPA that you feel is vague or difficult to apply in real-world terms?
I think, you know, most of those, and again, there are conferences on the differences between privacy and security, right? I mean, there are many, many, many practices that protect privacy and protect security, or protect cyber information. And so if you delve into those practices and you make yourself aware of the mandates by the California privacy laws, find yourself legal counsel, then as long as you do all those primary protection mechanisms in your company, just build it up from the bottom up, then you're going to be okay. It's when the people that neglect all that kind of stuff like that, they're the ones that are going to be in trouble.
Mm.
I think similar to GDPR, you know, there's the confusion over kind of the right to forget data, and so you know, there's certain data that you're required to keep for compliance reasons, or that you want to keep for good security, and I think that'll be worked out as you know, they start enforcing it in case law. What is actual data that can be forgotten if a customer asks you to forget it, and what, you know, do you need to keep for maybe other compliance statutes, things like that. But I do think this goes back to the last speaker as well. You should be asking yourself, one, do we need to keep this data, and how long do we need to keep it for? Two, do you ever need to collect it to begin with? You know, the sexy thing in the last couple decades, because of the tech firms, is collect all this data and big data, and we're going to monetize it, and we're going to analyze it and figure out trends and stuff. You're a small and mid-sized business. How much have you done that in the last 10 years? So all these questions, all these things that you're collecting and storing, do you really need to be doing that? And I think that's where you start and ask yourself the question. Because if you do it, you got to protect it. You got to have the ability with CCPA to delete it and forget it. And where is all your data? To the last speaker, right? Do you even know where all your data is?
I agree. In that discussion I was talking about earlier about doing a data inventory, as part of that data inventory, it is really, really important to not just have a data retention policy, but a data retention and disposition policy. So it's, to your point, it's like, well, when can I get rid of this? Oh, I have legal holds on this. Great. Everybody responds to a legal hold, but nobody ever removes them. So somebody says, you got to keep that one for 5 years. Well, 10 years later, you know, you still have that data there. So you have to have this disposition policy that says, hey, for this kind of stuff, after this much time, get rid of it. That's the risk. It's holding on to all of that data. So one of the main easy things that you can do is have a good data retention and disposition policy, get rid of that, reduce that risk by getting rid of all that extra data that you don't need to hold.
Kim, shall we see what questions the audience have for Rusty and Chris? If you'd like to raise your hands if you have a question. Right here.
Hi, Jackie Slope with the Anaheim Ducks. I wanted to see if you had any specific advice around a potential data breach for payment card systems. Any immediate reactions you would take or steps you would take?
I'm sorry, for what systems?
Payment cards? Credit cards.
Oh. Wow. We don't, I guess the biggest experts I know around here are the Secret Service in response to that particular question. They're really focusing on payment cards and credit card transactions right here in San Diego. So those are the biggest experts that I would refer you to.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific. I think it's like any system, you're making the decision to unplug right away, but if you are going to unplug, leave it on, keep the short-term memory so that when the forensic investigators come in, they have something to look at.
Other questions? Right here.
Hi, gentlemen. Thank you for your comments. Leonard Poole from Cybersecurity Solutions, a small defense contractor here in San Diego. Being an 18-man company, trying to manage our cybersecurity has been a challenge. We have been hit by ransomware in the past. But there was no way for us to know when the attack actually happened. I know you made the comment about be aware of the date when you think it happened, but from what you've learned so far, is there a way for us to have some insight to that we know that we're being attacked every day. You know, they're trying to get in the server, we can see that. But if we've actually been compromised, and how do we track that data through our network?
There are some really great affordable, our company focuses on small companies and small defense contractors and preparing them for 171 and the rest of that. I mean, all the way from 2 people to 50 people. So we work in your space, so I understand your challenge. One of the things is continuous monitoring and continuous vulnerability management. And there's some really cool, affordable tools for small companies now that EDR, Sentinel-1, those kinds of things that you can actually put on your networks and start monitoring your networks and monitoring your devices for activities that start to show up. The other side of it is just to develop this practice within your company to do continuous vulnerability management. That doesn't mean that, okay, well, I'm going to look on Saturdays to see if I got breached. I got breached on Wednesday. Right? You're not looking at the right time, right? So you have to be looking at this stuff continuously. That's the most fundamental thing that I can respond to you. And there's some great tools out there that are very affordable for small companies now.
I mean, so you got CMMC coming down your way, so I think that they're being very specific about what they expect if you've seen those draft models. I think at the end of the day, it goes to what you'll see in CMMC a lot, depending on what level you're going to be at, is that centralized logging kind of SIM solution and getting things from aggregating data and logs from all the different devices and information systems in your network to one place. So one, if something does happen and you need to go back and figure out what happened, you have a centralized source where you can go back and try and recreate what happened. The example of Sony, right? The first thing somebody's going to do when they get in, if they know what they're doing, is they're going to cover their tracks. They're going to turn off logging. They're going to erase those logs. They're going to write over those logs, whatever. So by having that central logging solution that's pulling from multiple devices and storing it for a period of time, you could maybe go back and try and figure out what happened in the past. I think the other thing is you mentioned kind of notification and alerting, and that's where these SIMs and artificial intelligence is getting better, but even just manual rules, when you're pulling data and aggregating it from multiple sources, you know, the endpoints, the firewalls, your cloud systems, you can sometimes identify events that in isolation don't look like that big of a deal on an operating system log or on a network firewall log. But when you start to see, hey, I just got all of these 4 events that came in, one from my Office 365, one from this endpoint, one from, in aggregation, that might raise that level of that event to a higher thing that you should look at.
Another thing you can find, and the reason we are experts at what we do is we train very, very heavily on digital forensic sciences and the tools that are used to do that. What's really cool about the tools that we use when you go in to look at a computer and you can look at all the activities that happen on that, one of the things we find is that, and on the Office 365 or G Suite, using the security consoles there, we can actually see that on Tuesday of the beginning of last month, the rules for your email were changed to let this stuff go through and to reduce your security alerts and stuff like that. Now I've got a time tag of when somebody actually went in and saw that. You're not going to see that on a day-to-day basis, but experts that are trained in this, that's why we are trained to do it. Call in the experts, ask for help, try to do it yourself. Those are the 3 options. Depends on how serious it is.
We have time for another question, if we have one out there. Anybody? Right here. Okay.
Hi, Stan Stahl from Citadel Information Group. And Chris, what you were saying on looking at the insurance exclusions, any real bad stories you've seen there where you think you're covered and you find out you're not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the physical was one that we saw in real time, and that was painful. I think the other thing that we've seen on a couple occasions is, so when you're talking about cyber liability, you're talking about first party and third party, right? So are they going to help you with your business interruption and remediating kind of the investigation of it and paying the digital forensics and that kind of stuff? Or are they also going to pay and help you for the notification and the lost business you see from that, and the setting up those communication firms and the call center? And so I think one of the most common things that, not necessarily an exclusion, the example I would give for that would be kind of the physical, but the not understanding, thinking that you had first party and third party, and now you come to a place where you have to notify and provide credit monitoring services and all this, and you actually only had the coverage, protecting the investigation and yourself.
One comment I make on that is, there are some great intellectual property experts available down here in Southern California. And the reason I was talking about doing this data inventory is one of the things that you want to do is really understand what your intellectual property is. And now all of a sudden, once you have that evaluation, it might be significantly greater than you thought it was. And so when you get cyber insurance, you want to make sure that you protect that intellectual property for the real value that it has.
We're about out of time, so I'd like to thank Rusty and Chris and Kim for a great discussion.